In the very center of Europe, between the powerhouses of Saxony and Brandenburg, lies a mystery almost no traveler notices. Rolling forests, medieval villages, baroque churches, and the quiet waters of the river Spree conceal one of the continent's last hidden nations. They are called the Sorbs, an endangered Slavic people whose presence here predates Germany itself. While the world knows of the Basques in Spain, the Sami in Scandinavia, and the Bretons in France, few realize that in the heart of modern Germany, a nation without a state still endures. Today, only 60 to 70,000 Sorbs remain. Yet their survival tells a story as dramatic, fragile, and enduring as Europe itself. Around the 6th century CE, Europe was in motion. As a Roman world collapsed and Germanic tribes swept westward into the crumbling empire, new peoples arrived from the east. Among them were the early Slavs, farmers, forest dwellers, and river navigators, who spread across Central and Eastern Europe in vast waves. One branch of these settlers pushed into the Elbe and Spree river basins, in what is today Eastern Germany. These were the ancestors of the Sorbs. Archaeological evidence tells their story in silence. Traces of timber houses, distinctive pottery, fortified hill settlements, and burial mounds. They carved out a homeland known later as Lusatia, a fertile region of meadows and rivers where Sorbian villages would endure for more than a millennium. Their presence did not go unnoticed. Early Frankish and Saxon chroniclers mention them with suspicion. Einhard, the biographer of Charlemagne, writes of the Serbi, fierce tribes resisting incorporation into the Carolingian world. During the Saxon wars of the late 8th and early 9th centuries, the Sorbs repeatedly fought against Charlemagne's armies and their newly Christianized Saxon allies. Thietmar of Merseburg, a 10th century bishop, describes the Sorbs as stubborn pagans, difficult to conquer, and unwilling to yield their language or traditions. This was not a marginal people on Europe's edge. They occupied a strategic heartland, a frontier between East and West. Their endurance through centuries of pressure and war is why the Sorbs still exist, when so many of their Polabian Slavic cousins vanished entirely. By the dawn of the High Middle Ages, Lusatia was no longer a wilderness. It was the homeland of a people who would, against the odds, remain Europe's hidden nation for the next 1,500 years. By the 11th century, a new force reshaped Central Europe, the Ostsiedlung, the great German eastward expansion. Encouraged by emperors, bishops, and princes, German settlers, farmers, merchants, monks moved into Slavic lands, bringing with them new laws, fortified towns, and feudal order. For the Sorbs, this was the beginning of their greatest struggle, survival in the shadow of Germanization. Sorbian villages were gradually absorbed into the political frameworks of their neighbors. In Upper Lusatia, Saxon lords imposed feudal rule, while in Lower Lusatia, Bohemian kings extended their influence. Later, Prussian administrators brought even harsher assimilationist pressures. The Sorbs became subjects of powers far larger than themselves, their land divided, their autonomy erased. The demographic transformation was stark. By the 1300s, the Sorbian homeland, once stretching deep into central Germany, had contracted to two small enclaves, Upper Lusatia, centered around Botzen-Budissin, and Lower Lusatia, around Cottbus-Chosbus. This was a fraction of their former territory, a cultural island in a rising sea of German speakers. The fate of their Slavic cousins illustrates the scale of this loss. The Polabian Slavs, once spread across northern Germany, were completely absorbed by the 18th century, their language extinguished, their identity erased. The Sorbs avoided that fate, but only narrowly. Their villages remained distinct, their language spoken at home and in church, yet they were increasingly marginalized in law, education, and trade. By the close of the Middle Ages, the Sorbs were no longer an independent people shaping Europe's destiny. They had become a hidden minority, enduring but constrained. Their survival was fragile, dependent on resilience in the face of centuries of cultural erosion. Unlike the Polabians, they refused to vanish. In the long struggle against assimilation, the Sorbs discovered that survival required more than weapons. Their greatest shields became faith, language, and cultural identity. Over centuries, the community divided along confessional lines. In Upper Lusatia, centered on Botzen, most Sorbs remained Catholic, preserving their rituals within the protective walls of the church. In Lower Lusatia, around Cottbus, Protestantism took root under Saxon and Prussian rule. This religious split created distinct cultural flavors, yet both branches found in faith a bulwark against complete Germanization. In sermons, hymns, and catechisms, the Sorbian tongue lived on. The church often served as the last defender of the language. In the 19th century, figures like Bishop Jan Jakob Beneda championed Sorbian education, publishing prayer books and advocating bilingual schooling. The pulpit, not the classroom, became the arena where Sorbian endured. Linguistically, the Sorbs are remarkable. Their speech survives in two distinct languages, Upper Sorbian, with roughly 15,000 speakers, and Lower Sorbian, with barely *7,000 remaining. Both belong to the West Slavic family, closely related to Czech and Polish, yet distinct in vocabulary and grammar. This makes Sorbian one of Europe's rarest linguistic treasures, living evidence of the continent's forgotten Slavic frontier. But today, UNESCO places both languages on its Red Book of Endangered Languages, classifying them as seriously endangered. Children grow up speaking German first. Sorbian increasingly lingers only in cultural festivals, folk songs, and the prayers of the elderly. And yet, despite the pressures of assimilation, identity remains stubborn. For many Sorbs, to speak the language, even in whispers, is an act of quiet resistance, a thread binding them to ancestors who refuse to disappear. The modern era brought new trials for the Sorbs. Under Prussian rule, state policies pushed assimilation aggressively. Schools became the main instrument. Children were punished for speaking Sorbian, their language driven out of classrooms and replaced with German. The intent was clear: erase the minority by severing its tongue. The Nazi period proved even harsher. Sorbian organizations were banned, newspapers and books suppressed, and cultural associations dissolved. Sorbs were officially classified as German, a bureaucratic erasure of their identity. Speaking Sorbian in public became an act of quiet defiance. After the war, their fate shifted once more. The German Democratic Republic (GDR) recognized the Sorbs as a national minority. In 1945, the cultural umbrella group Domowina was re-established, giving the community formal representation. The schools and publishing houses were reopened, and Sorbian gained a modest space in education and media. The census of 1956 recorded approximately 81,000 Sorbs, a significant recovery. Yet after German reunification in 1990, state support weakened, and assimilation pressures returned. Today, their numbers continue to decline, a reminder that survival requires constant resistance, not just recognition. Today, the Sorbs number between 60,000 and 70,000 people, yet only a fraction remain active speakers of the language. The community is geographically divided. The Upper Sorbs, largely Catholic, are concentrated around Botzen, in Saxony, while the Lower Sorbs, predominantly Protestant, cluster near Cottbus, in Brandenburg. Efforts to preserve identity continue. There are Sorbian language schools, bilingual road signs, radio broadcasts, and cultural institutions dedicated to music, theater, and literature. Within the European Union, the Sorbs enjoy recognition as a protected national minority, with formal rights to language and cultural preservation. Yet the pressures of assimilation remain intense. German dominates in workplaces, universities, and media. Many Sorbian children grow up fluent only in German, while their ancestral language becomes confined to ceremonies, festivals, or classrooms. Survival is possible, but the margin narrows with each generation. The Sorbs are more than a small Slavic enclave. They are a symbol of Europe's hidden diversity. In a continent shaped by empires and nation-states, they represent a different story: identity without sovereignty. Their existence parallels that of the Bretons in France, the Occitans of southern Europe, the Friulians of Italy, the Aromanians of the Balkans, and the Kashubians of Poland, micronations whose histories are written in persistence rather than conquest. Anthropologists often point to the Sorbs as a textbook case of cultural resilience. For over 1,000 years, they endured conquest, colonization, forced assimilation, and suppression. Yet their language and customs survived. They remind us that Europe's history is not only the story of kings and armies, but also of small peoples who resisted erasure. But their future remains uncertain. With speaker numbers declining and assimilation pressures mounting, the question becomes unavoidable. Will the Sorbs endure another century? Or will they, like the Polabian Slavs before them, vanish into history's shadows? Their survival depends not only on cultural pride, but also on the recognition that the loss of a language, a people, or a tradition is not just a local tragedy. It is a diminishment of Europe itself. The story of the Sorbs is not only about one small people. It is about what Europe risks forgetting. Their survival illuminates the fragile threads of cultural memory, reminding us that the continent's richness lies not just in its great states, but in its countless small voices. Every minority language is a library, every tradition a form of knowledge. To lose them is to lose part of ourselves. The Sorbian poet Guido Lorenc once wrote that a people's survival depends on the courage to remember differently. For the Sorbs, memory is resistance, and language is a bridge to ancestors who refuse to vanish. As the camera lingers on the Easter riders of Lusatia, hundreds of men on horseback, proclaiming resurrection in Sorbian hymns, we glimpse both tradition and defiance. In classrooms where children learn German and Sorbian side by side, in folk songs carried across generations, the nation endures. In knowing the Sorbs, we discover Europe's forgotten layers, nations without armies, without borders, yet with stories as deep as empires. And in honoring them, we confront a truth, that the survival of the smallest cultures often tells us the most about our shared humanity.